The tale of Hong Kiltong is justly celebrated as a kind of foundational text among the vernacular Korean literary tradition. It is often described as a kind of Robin Hood tale. It is a story, somewhat legendary, of a hero who robs from the rich and powerful. He does not necessarily give back to the poor, as the Robin Hood legend has it, but the idea is he robs the authorities. It's much more a story, I would say, about rebelling against the established authorities than it is about purely economic means. It is ultimately, I see it as a parable of China-Korea relations, where Korea is the younger, let's say, illegitimate child of China, which is the repository of all authority in most of their troubled history. That's symbolic. The story itself is fairly simple. A king of Korea has a high-ranking minister of Korea has a primary wife and son, and then he goes, and after a vision of what his next child would be like and how wonderful, he goes to his wife, and he's in the mood, and she kind of puts him off. What are you doing? Yeah, go away from me. So he goes off and pulls aside a chambermaid in his palace. You can make of this what you will. Certainly there are power relationships and sexual dynamics at play here. Have at it. It's in the modern light, it is a bit unsavory. But a child is born from that probably rather hurried union, and this is Kiltong. And he does turn out to be a quite special child as he is growing up, and everybody recognizes that, wow, this kid is pretty extraordinary. But because he is the illegitimate son, he's really not entitled to much. He does not get to call his father father. He has a brother, a half-brother, whom he cannot address as brother, and this is a sticking point throughout. And you feel for him by building this story around this basic relationship and this psychological torment of this child. It's remarkably powerful and very rich. Kiltong bowed twice and explained, "Though I grow to manhood by the vigor your excellency has passed to me, and realize the profound debt I owe you for the gift of life and mother's upbringing, my life still bears one great sorrow. How can I regard myself as a man when I can address neither my father as father nor my brother as brother?" He puts it right there, and right in the very beginning. This is a clearly articulated psychological drama of illegitimacy, and he feels cheated of his birthright. But more than that, it's not about just having the authority of the palace, because that doesn't really get much play here, but by just placing it in those terms and the relationship of the father to son, it is clearly a sense of the dignity of being legitimate, and who can't identify with that on some level. The dignity and the pride of having an open relationship with your own father. This is somewhat heartbreaking, and everything builds out of that. Of course, he cannot be recognized. He is not recognized, and his mother, or his father's primary consort, concubine, not even the wife, is a little jealous of this young man of Gil-dong, and conspires to have him killed. She hires essentially an assassin to go and kill him. And in this, you get a clear parallel to the tale of Genji, who was a similar story of an illegitimate, the illegitimate child of an emperor who is in a somewhat fractious relationship with the rivals to the throne. And here you can see, okay, so it's not just Korea, it's also Japan. This is meant to be a kind of universal problem. And it's not that hard to identify with, well, okay, the problems with complicated families and step siblings and all that, it is an issue. And in any traditional culture that recognizes exclusively primogeniture, it's going to be an issue, where the firstborn son, the male heir, is pretty much the inheritor of everything in an aristocratic line, and everybody else is sort of left to shift for themselves, which is an awkward situation that leads to lots of rivalries and backbiting and jealousy and all of this. So anyway, the coaxing woman, the primary concubine, hires an assassin to go and kill Kiltong, and he goes and he tries to sneak in, but Gil-dong, showing initially some of what makes him so special, hears apparently somebody coming, or senses it somehow, and makes himself invisible. That's a little bizarre. It's one of several instances throughout the story where he calls on magical powers and uses these to essentially defeat his enemies or evade punishment of some sort, but always just this miraculous little moment that he suddenly can do something that, whoa, what's that from? Which I see as a kind of proto-magical realism, that tradition, and it has some precedents before this, and there's certainly antecedents, but here we see an example of the miraculous, the bizarre, the fantastical just being remarked within the story, and it moves on amid essentially realism. It's a very realistic story we have here, with the psychological drama playing out. The characters are given real flesh. That moment of miraculous within the ordinary that you see playing out, an ordinary family drama, you could say. This moment of mystery makes the whole thing seem strange. That pall of mystery shines over, Paul doesn't shine, that light of mystery shines over all of the ordinary within it. And the strangeness of the mystery then also bleeds into the ordinary. So you have to look curiously at everything, not just the miraculous, but also the ordinary. And gee, why is that ordinary? And why is it that way? It's a fairly standard critical move to try and attract attention to common problems, and just have people take another look at, well, you know, that's a peculiar institution you have going on there. Why do you do those things that way? Why do things happen this way? Just to try and prompt that reflexive muscle in the reader. But anyway, he disappears, he becomes invisible, but then he reappears, kills the assassin, and kills the associate who had been of the concubine who had contracted with the assassin, who was a soothsayer or whatever. I don't know. I don't care. It's all complicated. Who gives a damn? But the point is, he is now an outlaw, and he goes to his father, says, "I've done something terrible. I have to go away. I will come back, but I have to leave." And it's a curious admission of obligation that he goes to his father and admits this and says, "I have done something bad. You're going to hear about it. I have to leave." It's like paying your respects, and he's not just going to slink off in the night. A curious instance of filial piety, and this is kind of the point. Throughout, all of this is placed very much within the context of that father-son relationship, of the obligations of the father to the son and the son to the father, and this is Confucianism, and this story is Confucianism writ large, with a critique of it. Here we have filial piety, the pretext that, as Confucius says, the famous analect, my philosophy, one master says to the other, my philosophy has one thread running through it, obligation or loyalty and reciprocation, and that is all. Loyalty of one party to the other, and then reciprocation of that loyalty. So you can see how this creates a kind of social stability, a social balance. But it is a balance based on frozen social structures. There is no way to break out of that. A father owes a certain loyalty to his children to raise them properly and do all of that. And children very much owe loyalty to their father, and that relationship is sacrosanct. On a state level, which is really where Confucius was aiming with this, you can see it as well, the king and the subjects. The king owes it to the subjects to create a stable and prosperous society, and the subjects owe the king obedience. And this creates stability. And here you can see Kiltong, who is stuck in a relationship like this, where he is very loyal to his father, but his father is not necessarily reciprocating. And this is the core tension of this story. Kiltong pays his respects, goes off, falls in with a group of thieves, and is immediately recognized as somebody of superior worth, of somebody of great talent, and this goes to a kind of meritocratic ethos, where he is seen as somebody of great value, and so the thieves, hundreds of them apparently, instantly adopt him as their leader. And this is a rather extraordinary situation that he comes in. Certainly, we know that he has great talent just in, the way he killed the one guy and the associate. But, is he really ready to lead a band of hundreds of thieves? I don't know. But supposedly, they recognize it in him, and that's just taken as a given. Meritocracy. Valued for what you can do, valued for your talents, not your heritage or your status in society. They go on these raids. The first place they attack is a monastery. There are a couple of different complications with that we don't need to go into, but very quickly they fall into a pattern of raiding government institutions, administrative posts, anything that has power. And again, it does not seem to be about money. They presumably were told that they make off with lots of treasure, and that's good for them. We don't dwell on that at all. We never learn what they're doing with it, how they split it up. Are they becoming particularly wealthy with this? We don't know. It's just like they go in and they take from the authorities. That's it. Their identity as thieves seems to be, very much aligned with the anti-authoritarian or the anti-authority character of what they're doing. And significantly, you have to think of this in terms of, this is a popular story. This is a popular legend that evolved through presumably oral storytelling for a time, a little bedtime story of, the thief. And it's a great adventure story for that. And you can get into it. And, who doesn't really, it's a good adventure. It's like, the outlaw, the rebel, and he's going off and doing this and having the adventures. And it's all great. But the clear parallel is China and Korea on a national scale, because China was always the big dog in the neighborhood of East Asia, and Korea was always somewhat the satellite state, a little subservient. Their government always adhered to like Chinese norms. They adopted Confucianism. They did all their administrative work, all their government work in official Chinese language. And there, you could see how the illegitimate underdog of Gil-dong would be attractive, perhaps, to somebody who would then be thumbing his nose at the authorities. And this is fun. This is interesting to follow, and you kind of get swept up in incident after incident is built upon this construct of questioning authority, of rebelling against authority, questioning the illegitimacy of the authority itself. When at one point Kiltong goes and has duplicates of himself made. He is magical, and he creates some straw men. It's an old legend, again, indicating the popular nature of this, the almost fairy tale quality of it. Popular legend, you can create a straw man, is where we get the phrase. And it takes on the representative properties of the individual. And so one day Gil-dong makes a bunch of straw men, and they become his clones, essentially. And he sends them out into Korea to go continue his work, just in different places. And this makes it much harder for everybody to find. Because, if you're sitting in Seoul in the Imperial Palace, and you hear about a raid by this great thief happening up in the north, while simultaneously another one is happening way down in the south, what is that? It's a brilliant military tactic, to be quite honest, if you can harness magic. Again, the magical and the mundane makes you consider things. But at one point, a Kiltong goes and sees his half brother, and the half brother instantly sees him and says, "Okay, you're my brother." And they bring him in. They capture all of the they capture 7 others. They bring him in, and well, it turns out that they were all the doubles. So they captured all these while the real one was still running around free. So right there, you're thinking, okay, when he has that moment, when the brother looks at him and says, "You're my brother," you think, okay, this is, this is the aristocrat, this is the primary son, he has the acuity, he has the wisdom to look into someone's eyes, as they say very explicitly, into the eyes, and recognize truth and value and identity. And he knows because he can see. That is something you expect of aristocrats. But it's only like a page or so later that you realize, when they all turn out to be straw men, the son, the brother, the firstborn son, wasn't that special. He couldn't recognize that this was an imposter, that this was a clone, that this was not the real deal. His merit, thus, his talent, is called into question. He is the repository of the tradition. He is the one who gets all the benefits of that tradition. But he is not as wise. He is not as talented as his younger, illegitimate brother. And you see this going on, and it's a recurrent thing that plays out, where eventually the story takes a turn, and Gil-dong leaves. He says, "All right, I'm going to take off." And he goes and he voyages out. And here the story takes a little bit of a turn. If you're reading it as the Robin Hood tale, the stealing from the rich part really kind of ends with the destruction of the straw men. So you're not certain. Well, I thought that was the story I was reading. What's happening here? You're probably supposed to lean in a little and question the text at this point. It seems a bit like an episodic shift, whereas everything before it had been very neatly organized and constructed to give a sense of deliberation and intention. But it does take a little bit of a shift, so you realize that, well, maybe the robbing from the rich thing isn't so central. Maybe this is about something more. It's not just about the legend, it's about something more. So Gil-dong goes off to another land. He leaves Korea, and he kills monsters, and is essentially made king of this land. He marries two girls who are heralded for, well, one is heralded for great talent. That is all we're told about her. We don't know anything about her. She does not appear to be anybody particularly wealthy or special in any other way. But she has great talent, and talent is what he's interested in. He marries that one because she was one of the damsels in distress of the prisoners of the monster. They kill the monsters. He marries the talented one as the primary wife, and then takes the second prisoner, who may be very talented, but we're not really told that, and that makes her his second wife, so his secondary wife. And then he settles into being a good leader, and he seems to be quite good. He takes care of his army. All of his thieves have now become his army, and he sees to it that he reforms agriculture so that they are well fed and well trained, and he seems to be a good administrator, a good king. But he also starts looking abroad. He also starts looking around and saying, well, gee, maybe I could do some other stuff here. It says here, the island kingdom of Ludao to the south, with its many thousand li of fertile land, had constantly held Kiltong's interest and attention as truly a country of heaven-sent abundance. Calling his men together one day, he said, "It is now my intention to attack Lao, as I am asking every one of you to give his all in this effort," which is a weird imperialist turn. He has gone from being the outlaw to being the absolute authority. He conquers this other land. He claims a mandate of heaven. He calls his army the righteous army. These are all little warning signs for absolutism, personally. When he sets himself up as the new king and essentially an emperor at this point, he invites back to visit him his brother, who was, who had essentially taken over from his father as a, upper mid-level functionary in the government, bureaucrat, and doing quite well for himself. But he is now essentially appointed as the emissary to this new king. So the brother, Gil-dong, who was never the legitimate one, and was always sort of like, chafing under the in the shadow of his older brother. Now Kiltong is the king, and he's in the position of having his brother come to appeal to him, and the relationship is absolutely flipped and, if anything, exacerbated. But there's something in the characterization of this bizarre little sequence where, after he is made king, the text doesn't even reference him as Gil-dong that much anymore. For a good stretch there, he is identified only as the king. So he has become the state, essentially. He has become the new empire. And you have to view him that way. And so, how is he react? Is he making the same mistakes? Is he investing too much faith in legitimacy at this point? It's a little troubling at this point, because what you would want is to him to come along. Personally, I would want, maybe not you, I would want to see him come in and try and correct some of the wrongs, saying, okay, I grew up feeling this way, I want to fix that. And it's a little uncertain, it's a little ambiguous as to whether or not he does once he gets power. Certainly, they emphasize the meritocracy, the stability. The constructions of the government are now based on meritocracy, but the continuity is still there. And the way he couches the very ending of it, the buttons he's pushing are all about the continuity, the stability, the conservative nature of what he has built. When his own mother, the former chambermaid, who is now identified as the Queen Dowager, when she dies, he holds a specific mourning period of 3 years of observances, and this comes hard on the heels of others. He has mourned for, he has held mourning observances for his father, who died at this point, for the evil stepmother, if you will, the king's his father's wife. And he has done all of these things very properly, very judiciously, very ceremoniously. He has observed all of these social norms. So what he seems to be positing, what the story seems to be positing, is that stability lies best in talent as opposed to birth. He's not suggesting throwing out the aristocratic system altogether. He emphasizes that his own first son became crown prince upon his passing at his instruction, but that all of his other children, and remember, he had at least 2 wives at this point, so he was setting up the same dynamic. All of his other children also became princes and princesses. So You could argue this saying that, well, he's really just he's still just favoring his own children, but that's kind of what royal families are supposed to do. So I'm not sure if you can really slam him for that. He is continuing the same basic structure of the society, but with a slight modification. And here again, you got to step back to the Chinese-Korean dynamic, where China is the authority, and Korea is just saying, okay, look, we can observe Confucianism too. We have adopted Confucianism. We buy into 100% loyalty and reciprocity, filial piety, the whole thing, and we're not looking to revolutionize anything. We just want to be recognized for what our talents can bring. And you can't impose your will upon us, impose your superiority over us, ignoring those talents. When you do that, you deprive yourself, because our talents have potential. And you see that in the way he sets up this kind of ideal kingdom on his own. Just, you can talk about imperialism, you can talk about the heavy hand of the righteous army, but he establishes something inherently very conservative, inherently very imperial, inherently very profitable, probably. And all he's saying, all this story is saying, is don't base legitimacy on something so silly and unreasonable as tradition.